Hello, my name is Jim Hatherley from the Westborough Republican Town Committee. Good morning. And I'm here today with John Hostage, who is a candidate for the state representative position on Beacon Hill in a new district that includes precincts, 5 precincts of Westborough, 5 out of 6 precincts. So John, good morning. Welcome to Westborough.
Morning, Jim. Thank you for having me here.
Let's begin with an introduction. You are a resident of Southborough, and you're here conversing with Westborough voters today. So what do they need to know about you to make an informed decision on Election Day?
Well, Jim, I've lived in Southborough for just over 20 years, but I've done business in Westborough, in Framingham, and in Northborough. My kids have gone to school in Northborough, that Algonquin High School, sharing with Southborough rather. Competed in sports with and gone to many sporting events here in Westborough. So I feel like we're all part of the same area, and I brought this map here to show that it's the new district is Westborough, Northborough, Southborough, and a small piece of Framingham, and it's a pretty tight-knit little area, heavily populated. So I'm here to really address the people of Westborough who maybe don't know me, and let them know a little bit more about where I stand on the issues versus my counterpart here, Kate. And we are polar opposites, I think, as far as our ways that this government should be run here in Massachusetts. And I'd like to go to Beacon Hill and bring change. There's seriously outnumbered Democrat to Republican numbers up on Beacon Hill, and if we can bring a few more Republicans up, I think it would be a benefit to everybody in this district.
John, you're also a small business owner, aren't you?
That's correct. I've run a small marketing company, started off in Boston and moved up north to Woburn. Of course, the rents in Boston became cost prohibitive for some of the small businesses, and we've been managing to survive through COVID and survived all the tax increases and other things that have happened to make running a small business in this state very difficult. But we're fighting through it, and hope to do some things on Beacon Hill to make it better for the small business owners as well.
Deciding to run for political office is a big deal. So why did you decide to run? Well,
Jim, I can remember watching on TV when some of the schools in Virginia were having parents come to some of the meetings, and I'll go back a little bit to one of the best things that happened with COVID was that parents got a real glimpse into what their kids were learning, the curriculums, the materials that the libraries were presenting, and parents were objecting to a lot of what they were seeing. So when the parents were going into these meetings, they were being vilified for challenging the school boards and for challenging the staff at the schools, and the teachers unions and others were making the parents feel very uncomfortable to speak up about how they felt. So I thought about maybe joining the school board. It was only then that I kind of began to get a little deeper into the local politics and learned that this seat was going unopposed, and that Kate Donahue was essentially going to walk right into the seat if nobody challenged her. So I decided to get in the race. And
that Virginia case was interesting too, because didn't the Attorney General of the United States call those parents domestic terrorists?
They sure did. They sure did.
Sick the FBI on them?
It was very disturbing to watch, and I think it's happening here. It's happening in pretty much every state where these things are being taught and parents have learned about it. They're being challenged.
So you're running as a Republican in a state that consistently elects Democrats. So why should Westborough voters elect a Republican?
Well, I think it's time for change, and there has been some very successful Republicans on Beacon Hill, Charlie Baker being one. You've mentioned a few others in the past that I think there's been some good success, and I think in the end to bring more balanced numbers on Beacon Hill would be a benefit to everybody. Right now, I think it's 130 Democrats to 29 Republicans, 4.5 times as many. I think we need to get a little closer to a 50-50 balance on Beacon Hill, so that the common sense legislation that's coming out of Beacon Hill, and not some of the things that are coming out now that are completely partisan politics.
John, you've spoken very passionately about the education. I want to follow up with that. How concerned should we be regarding the lower test scores around the country in every state, including Massachusetts, after the pandemic? What can we do about that?
Well, I think we need to look closely at those numbers. The closing of the schools was a big mistake. The test scores are lower in the public schools, but in some of the Catholic schools, they're not changed at all. So it basically proves the point that the closing of schools was a mistake. Again, that was done by people that really should not have been making those decisions. And I think what we need to do is get back to the schools and have them spend all their time teaching math, reading, and arithmetic, and history, the good and the bad about American history, but get away from the indoctrinating of our children and some of the other materials that they're forcing on our kids. This woke agenda has really run amok, and at this point they're spending less time teaching our kids the important things they need to be learning at school and more time teaching them things that maybe the parents should have the option of teaching at home.
You know, we've seen a trend in some states, you mentioned Virginia, but also in Arizona now, where there is a movement to have the state fund the child instead of funding the school district,
yeah.
giving parents a choice, freedom of just the word choice, to send the kids to a private school versus the public school alternative. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think it's come time that has to happen because, and in fact, Jeff Deal has mentioned multiple times in his opportunities to talk about it, that the schools are now teaching in a way that some parents don't feel comfortable sending their kids to public school, and should they decide they want to send them somewhere else, they should have the ability to do so, and they may not be able to do so if they don't have the money to do it. So the money needs to be available to them to switch schools if they want to, and I think that's a step that's it's long overdue, I think, at this point, to be an option.
Now, part of this is about the school union, too.
They've become a little too big for their britches, I think.
Big funder of the Democrat Party.
Absolutely.
Let me turn the page here, because in Massachusetts, energy is a big issue. And it's a big issue because our costs in Massachusetts are among the highest in the entire country. The Democrats, and particularly your opponent, are advocating a green energy approach to energy. And we've already seen an increase in the price of gasoline, but also increase in the cost of electricity and home fuel oil.
Yeah, and sadly, we haven't seen anything yet.
That's right. We're hearing that as early as next month.
Yeah, we're on the doorstep of a serious increase in electric, which begs one to say, if the increase in electric power is going to go up that much, it's going to get awful expensive to charge an electric vehicle. We really need to focus more on a balanced energy process. I think we need to be energy independent. We need to go back and bring those pipelines that Maura Healey stopped back into the state. We need to look at some of the other options besides solar and wind. Nuclear has come a long way from where it began and is a much safer and viable option for energy. I also think we need to look at fracking and not be so quick to talk about ending it like they're talking about in Pennsylvania, and some of the candidates running there are talking about trying to end fracking.
So we're hearing that there is the prediction that we're going to have brownouts in Massachusetts this wintertime. That's correct. You know, in our businesses as well as our homes. So I'm hearing you say you think we're headed in the wrong direction?
Yes, absolutely. I think we need to go back and have a very diverse energy supply coming from multiple places. We can't just transition overnight to renewable energies. It has to be a well thought out process, and those technologies need to be proven to be able to handle the demands of areas as densely populated as the Northeast. And at this current time, they're not capable of carrying those demands, and we'll be seeing that firsthand this winter.
were you in the legislature, would you be voting to subsidize these alternatives, the
No,
solar?
I would not. Yeah, absolutely not. Yeah, they've been subsidized. We've seen Solyndra and a few other opportunities where we've put money into these big boondoggles, and they've proven to fail.
Actually, we had one in Massachusetts that DeVal Patrick funded. I forget, $35 million. It was bankrupt within 6 months or something like that.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, follow the money.
Taxes are always an issue in every state, particularly Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Question one is the so-called millionaire's tax. Is that a good idea?
Absolutely not. It's another attempt to change the tax structure here in the state. It's been tried 7 or 8 times already and failed. For anybody who thinks it's going to be a millionaire's income only, they need to take a much closer look at this bill. It is going to affect people selling their homes. If they sell their home for over $1 million, they're going to be considered millionaires. It's a 9% tax on that sale. There's just all kinds of different ways that they're going to be able to begin to manipulate this bill. And once it passes, the $1 million will become $500,000. It's a slippery slope. I think we need to stay at a flat tax. If it was voted a 5% sales tax here in Massachusetts and it never got implemented, but I think it's clear that the taxpayers don't want to be driving successful millionaire business owners and income earners out of the state. There's been a mass exodus. 50,000 people, I think, last year left the state, and we can't afford to be losing. We want to attract businesses into the state to be taking advantage of all these great high education young people coming out of our institutions. But if businesses are going to get energy costs that are exceeding other states, they're not going to want to come here and make their businesses here.
Right. In the past, with those 6 or 7 times before, it was called the graduated income tax.
Right.
And it was very simple to understand. A graduated income tax meant graduated income tax. Now it's about the millionaire. Do you find the ads about that? Oh, it's only going to strike millionaires.
Yeah, very deceptive.
I'm for it.
As most of the questions, the commercials voting yes, and in fact I'm voting no on all 4 questions. But all the commercials are very misleading when it comes to the actual questions and how these things are going to be handled. The legislature is the only one that can dictate how this money is spent. So while they'll take this money and they talk about roads and fixing things like that, there's no guarantees that that's where the money's going to go. The legislature can spend that money on any other projects they want to spend it on.
Money goes to that out of the budget anyway.
That's correct.
So all they have to do is say, well, we're going to guarantee $2 billion out of $130 billion.
That's right. That's right. And they fulfilled their promise,
Yeah.
but
Which they would have done anyway.
exactly right.
Which is kind of interesting. Isn't it true that
if I may, if they were to pass that bill, we're essentially going to make Massachusetts the 4th highest tax behind states like California, New York, and New Jersey. Is that really where Massachusetts wants to be? Is among those kind of states that are losing good quality people left and right because nobody wants to live in a state that has that kind of tax burden on them. Right.
And I think that sometimes people don't see themselves as being impacted on this. Isn't it true that if you retire and you get a lump sum payment when you retire?
That makes you a millionaire.
Yeah, it makes you a millionaire for that 1 year.
That's right.
Suddenly you have a partner.
That's right. And 9% is a big chunk of that money that you were counting on to retire with. So, and true of the sale of a home that somebody's spent their life paying for. Now all of a sudden you're going to sell that home and you're going to have to lose 9% of it. That's a big chunk of what money you were counting on for the rest of your life.
You mentioned that you're going to vote no on all questions, which includes question 4 about the illegal migrants getting driver's license. Why are you going to do that?
Well, I spent 3 or 4 months earlier this year collecting signatures to put it on the bill. I think the idea behind that bill is not to give licenses, but rather to give licenses that are exactly like licenses they give to you and I, a real ID that we paid for and educated our kids through schools to to get those licenses. It's a privilege. It's not a right. And in this case, I think there's a little more nefarious plan here, and that is to automatically register them to vote and leave it up to the RMV to then remove them from the voter registries, which we all know isn't going to happen because the Registry of Motor Vehicles has enough challenges just managing the driving, let alone trying to handle the voting rolls.
That gets a lot of play because law enforcement says it's better if everybody is.
Or at least one law enforcement officer said in the commercial.
In the commercial, that's right.
I think if they were to take a survey of a few more, they might find that the views are different.
We mentioned before about the migration of people out of Massachusetts.
Right.
And actually it's the fourth highest among all the states of people leaving the Bay State and going primarily
New Hampshire.
to New Hampshire and Florida.
Absolutely right.
What can Beacon Hill be doing to reverse that trend?
Well, I think Beacon Hill can work on lowering taxes. They can do things to incent companies to come here and really just make it easier for people to want to stay here and not feel they need to leave Massachusetts for other places like Florida. Now, I understand in the winter why people might want to go to Florida, but this is a wonderful place with 4 great seasons. It's a beautiful state to be in, and we'd like to try to find ways to have people stay.
Absolutely, and we see this divergence now between California and Florida. It seems that's the coming battle in this country. States like California, Massachusetts, people moving away, states like Florida receiving in. And I think that when those people move, they take their businesses with them, right?
They do.
Which means that they take their jobs with them.
Yeah, they take a lot of tax revenue with them.
But people's lives are influenced because their job is now someplace else, and they have to either decide to move or try something
find
new.
a new line of work. Yeah, find a new line of work.
Yeah.
That's a difficult transition for anything, anybody up in their 40s and 50s to start a new career. At one point, our business was struggling enough that I had started to consider looking into a new second opportunity, second career, if you will, and it is very challenging to do, and unless you have a special skill set that you can bring to the table, it can be a real challenge.
How do you feel about voter ID?
I'm all for it. I don't think there can be enough security in our election, so I'd like to see across the board every state have voter ID. I think safe and secure elections are something people are starting to question given the last couple election cycles we've gone through, and I think anything we can do to increase voters' confidence in the security of those elections would be a good idea. We've seen ample cases where I think the number was 31,000 dead people on the voter rolls that they apologize for missing, but I think if we take a closer look, there's probably some of that going on in just about every state.
That was in Colorado.
Colorado, that's right.
A lot of forgiveness there.
Yeah, a lot of forgiveness.
Only because they get caught.
Yeah, well, and it's the only country in the world that does mail-in ballots right now is the United States. It used to be exclusively for military and for people who were ill and couldn't get to the voter, and now it's become widespread. And anybody you ask about it, why other countries don't do it, it's because it opens the door to fraud. There's been cases where, people that lived in an apartment building 2 and 3, 4 years ago are getting ballots still sent to those addresses, and there's no accountability for it. So it's rampant fraud.
You'd be voting against mail-in ballots?
Absolutely. I would end all mail-in ballots except for military and special circumstances.
A few years back, the Democrats under Deval Patrick increased the sales tax to 6.25%, which was a 25% increase. Do you think that the legislature should be voting to return the sales tax to 5%?
I absolutely do. It was voted on by the voters of Massachusetts. We already are in a situation where we have a surplus of tax revenue, and they're trying to figure out either A, a way to give it back, or B, a way not to have to give it back. What we have on Beacon Hill is not a tax problem, it's a spending problem, and it's about learning better ways to allocate the money that they already have, not finding ways to take more of it.
What about sanctuary cities and actually sanctuary states? How do you feel about that?
Well, the Democrats have proven themselves very hypocritical about sanctuary. It's a sanctuary city if it's not in your city. Martha's Vineyard was almost comical to watch. Not for the migrants themselves. That was heartbreaking to see them be brought or flown to Martha's Vineyard, and within, I think it was 2 to 3 days, they were whisked away and put onto an Air Force base down on the Cape, and then slowly moved from there. So Massachusetts and all these other states that want to be sanctuary cities seem to talk a good game, but when the rubber hits the road and you actually have these migrants coming into the country and or into your state, they sing a different tune. They really need to spend a little more time looking at the poor states along the border and what they're enduring before they can even begin to get a real glimpse of what the problem is.
So on the news the other night, the town manager of a South Shore town, it wasn't Plymouth, it was the one town right next to it, they had 107 of these migrants dropped on them at night and put into a hotel. And suddenly this town manager is facing the reality that there are a bunch of children who do not read or understand a word of English who are going to the
into
schools.
the schools. Yeah.
And that could happen here in Westborough or Southborough or Framingham or Northborough, where you represent. What do we do in situations like that?
Well, I mentioned on the taping of the Frank and Mary show when that question came up, and I said that I had just finished hearing an interview with a teacher that said she's a history teacher, but she spends half of the time that she would normally be spending teaching history speaking remedial English to be able to get some of the kids in this class up to speed in English. And it's taking away from all the students, and most importantly, it's taken away from the United States citizens that are there to learn, and making us weaker as a country because our kids aren't getting the full education that they're going to school to get.
You know, and I've been wondering, as this has been going on for the last several years, is that if that's one of the reasons why our scores decline, because all of the students are counted, right?
Well, it's now coming from all sides. I mean, the closing of the schools has done a serious detriment to our youth, and this could take years to overcome. And we're continuing to exacerbate the situation by bringing in kids that don't speak English and putting a further burden on the teachers in the schools to be able to educate our kids at the same time, educate the kids that come into the country that can't speak English.
Let me move on to another one. Are you for or against the so-called defund the police movement that we've seen in urban areas all across the country?
I am absolutely against defund the police, and I think the results of even beginning to talk about such a plan and where it's actually happened, you see the results. The crime on the news is disturbing, and it's happening, and it's coming to a town near you, and I hope to God it doesn't come into Southborough, Westborough, Northborough, although I've heard some stories of things happening even in our towns that you never used to hear. So defunding the police is the absolute wrong way to go. We need to fund the police and put more police on the streets in the big cities and take away some of these people who are offering to let criminals out of jail and put bail, take away bail.
Well, that gets you down to the question of the DAs too, and their lack of prosecution.
Well, it's a growing trend to go ahead and let these people empty the prisons, and the results are there. And I think once we vote in the right people and change the way they're doing business, I think Jeff Deal and Laura Allen would be a great change for Beacon Hill. So get out and vote, and vote red.
You know, we haven't seen this in the past. Where crime is a leading issue in the campaign, but when you're watching the news from New York, it's crime, 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 24/7.
Chicago,
It's about crime.
yeah.
Chicago's
Yeah,
crime,
Detroit,
Los
yeah.
Angeles is crime. It's just very interesting to see, and that could happen here in Massachusetts too.
Yeah, and it's all up the northern parts of northern parts of the country, in Washington, Seattle, Portland. These are beautiful parts of the country that you used to only hear good things about, and now what you're hearing is not very positive.
Now, you mentioned that every town becomes a border town. Drugs,
Fentanyl, yeah,
big problem.
big problem.
What can Beacon Hill be doing about that?
Well, I think first thing Beacon Hill should be doing is ending the sanctuary cities and incenting people to come across the border and be invited into our state and all these other states. Because it's through that porous open border that the fentanyl is coming in, as well as the human trafficking, and we need to shore things up on both the north and the southern border, and really take a real hard look at who we're letting in the country and what their intent is.
And what about punishment for the dealers and?
Well, Ron DeSantis in Florida passed a bill, I think, is to punish those that are trafficking fentanyl and increase the penalties, because essentially these are murderers. When they sell fentanyl, fentanyl kills our youth. And so I think any strengthening of laws against people who are trafficking fentanyl are a good thing.
Yeah, you know, I keep on asking myself, what's worse? Is it the fact that there are these dealers, or that there is this group of people who want to buy? You know, the
demand?
The demand is greater than the supply, it seems.
Well, that's an issue that certainly we need to address. I don't think setting up injection sites and other ideas that have been tossed out there by some of these more liberal people are going to do anything to help the situation. I think we need to help those that are dependent, help those that are mentally ill, give them the help and the care that they need, and find ways to lessen the demand and punish the people that are bringing it in, increase those punishments so that there's less of an incentive to bring those drugs in.
It seems to me that part of the education process should be not so much of what is being taught about indoctrination, and more about what can happen to you about drugs. Because a lot of these people are getting this fentanyl, don't even realize it, and
Well, the problem is
dying.
it's so inexpensive that there's no reason why they can't try it. And the problem is it leads to an addiction, which ultimately kills you.
No, we've been talking for nearly half an hour here, and it just seems to me that all of these issues are somehow interconnected, aren't they? You just can't fix one thing and think that's going to do it, but one thing is going to lead to another to solve the problem. For example, if we have a stronger border, we'll stop some of the drugs and the migrants and the whole questions about illegals driving and being in the state. Have we failed in that regard to see the whole big picture, or are we just so focused on partisanship?
Well, I think a country divided is weak. I think there's been far too much division in both Republican and Democrats not coming together, the independents not speaking up and making their voices heard. This is the time to do it. This election will be an opportunity to bring the country together by deciding that we're going to vote some people in and bring change, and strengthen the border, go back to some of the policies that made us energy independent. You know, I don't know about you, but 2 years ago I was feeling a whole lot better about where I was financially and the security of our country than I am 2 years later, and it's because of the policies that the left has put in place over the last 2 years, and we need to quickly change it. This election is a start. 2024 will be a bigger step to making the changes that need to be made.
I heard that your 401 has become a 201.
Yeah, that's about right. That's about right.
Well, we're pretty much done with our time here, John, so let me thank you again for coming and talking to the voters of Westborough today. I hope you have more information regarding John's candidacy and give him a good look on Election Day. Let me remind the voters that early voting is going on right now, and Election Day is Tuesday, November 8th. So best of success to you,
Thank
John.
you very much,
Thank you
Jim.
for
Thank you for
coming
having
in.
me. Thank you to all the voters out there. Please get out and vote on November 8th. Please vote red. John Hostage is on the ballot, and an opportunity for you to make some change on Beacon Hill and bring balance.